Hello everyone, back to today's second video. We're doing the GWV Sunday Roundup for today's second video, getting various things together and having a look to see what's going on. Going to be a little bit of a shortened Sunday Roundup today because we've released the analogues update for the autumn. Our first look at some analogues for the coming season. You can find the video chat here on the homepage. Just scroll down the page a bit and it's above the polling count. Later on, that autumn analogues update will be placed on the autumn updates and forecast page. There'll be a written post that goes with that as well. It's looking at sort of the ENSO state at the moment and what that could mean for the autumn compared to past years with a similar ENSO state. Quite a complicated update, but I hope you find that one interesting and informative. As I say, this is GWV Sunday Roundup. We're going to start off looking at solar activity and then we'll look at a few other things as well, including the weather for next week's 10 days. Going to be some thunderstorms coming up in a couple of days' time, so we'll be updating Stormwatch about that this evening. So we're going to start off with solar activity. This is the solar disk on our side of this today from solarham.net. Officially, solar activity is at low levels. I've got one quite big sunspot over here. This is the GWV's summer season daily solar activity tracker, just updated by a good friend James Ackrill, as always. Big thanks James for updating this for us. A little bit of a problem with the data, but you can see what's happened over the past week since we did the GWV Sunday Roundup last week. Actually, we've had quite a spike in sunspots a couple of days ago. So we went up to there with the daily sunspot numbers at a higher level than at any time since back into May, just there. So we had a little bit of a spike up in activity a few days ago. Now we're moving back downwards again. Say today, solar activity was at low levels, moving back downwards again. But this was enough. You can't make it out well, but it was enough to lift the trend lines indicated by the thick green and thick red lines, to lift those upwards a little bit. So we have trended up over the past week in terms of sunspot numbers. Still no definitive drop down into solar minimum yet. It is coming, I keep saying this every week, we will be into solar minimum with no sunspots over several weeks, possibly even a few months. We will be into that before too much longer, in around a year to 18 months time. But at the moment we're still in a declining phase, which means it's not a linear process, so we do continue to see these spikes upwards whilst the trend is downwards. So had a bit of a spike in activity, but we are lowering down into low sunspot numbers at the moment, and will continue to do so over the coming weeks and months. This centering temperature from Hadley has been updated since the 12th of July. Actually, not sure what the delay is on updating this, but on the 12th of July, we stood at 17.5 degrees for July centering temperature, an anomaly of 1.7 degrees above average, so nearly 2 degrees above average. Not sure where that would be now, probably a little bit lower than that, although lifting up again in the next few days, it's going to get quite hot. It's been a very warm start to the year. So this chart shows the yearly CETs going right way back into the 1700s. The centering temperature, as I've explained before, is the oldest and most reliable long-term temperature record anywhere in the world. It goes back to the year of 1659, although of course back then it was very limited in terms of the observations that were taken. So you can't really compare this year's centering temperature to 1659 because the stations and the observations are very different. But even so, it is useful seeing what was happening in terms of the temperature 300 years ago. So we can go back to the 1700s over here with this, and then we can go up to present day, which is over here. You'll notice, excuse me, through the 20th century, we have this warming indicated by the red line here. The temperature is lifting, excuse me again, the temperature is lifting up through the 20th century, reaching its peak actually back in the 1980s and 1990s up there. Then in the early part of this century we get a little bit of a drop in the temperature, but the trend is now moving back upwards again. The red line, that is the trend line, that is lifting back upwards again. So the cool period that we went through, or cooler period that we went through a few years ago, started around 2007 and continued to around 2012. That cooler period looks like it's run out of steam now, and the temperature is increasing, or the temperature trend is increasingly moving back upwards once again, and we look like we're returning back to somewhere where we was back in the 1980s and 1990s. This thick green bar here is this year's temperature. As I say, we're only up to July, so we've still got another half of the year to go, or just under half of the year. But at the moment, the year of 2017 is certainly very, very warm indeed. That green bar is way above any other bar on this chart. The warmest year before then was 2014. That one just there. And I think the next warmest is back here at 2006. But you can see that the green bar is a long, long way now above any other blue bar on this chart. So even if we get a slightly cooler end to the year, we're probably going to have our warmest year on record, certainly back to the 1700s with the central England temperature. That does look very, very likely. As I say, we might get some cooler months coming up in the next few months, but it would have to be quite a dramatic cool down to offset how far up we are with this green bar. That does look quite striking and quite dramatic. We might have our first central England temperature for a year of 11 Celsius or above, which that would be very, very notable, of course. Looking at the oceans, this is how things are shaping up in the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. So we're dealing with Pacific first of all. The northern part of the Pacific Ocean still looks quite cool. Through the equatorial Pacific, this area just here, still no sign of ENSO. We remain at ENSO neutral condition. It looks like we're going to be staying at ENSO neutral condition really over the coming few weeks and months. So I think the autumn, and this is dealt with by the autumn analogues, it looks like the autumn is going to be an ENSO neutral autumn, that probably lasting even into the winter. In terms of the Atlantic Ocean, still the north-south split, so northern parts of the Atlantic Ocean up here looking quite cool, the tropical part of the Atlantic Ocean looking quite warm. Notice it is very warm now to the north of the UK, up here between Iceland and Scandinavia. So that's quite a big temperature contrast between these cool sea surface temperature anomalies here to the south of Greenland and these warm temperature anomalies up here to the north of the UK between Iceland and Greenland. Quite a big temperature contrast, and I'll have to do more research on this, but it is possible that this could sort of enhance the Atlantic a little bit as we go into the autumn. The temperature contrast here might produce some cyclogenesis, and we may be looking at quite an unsettled autumn. I have to do more research on that. The autumn analogues are showing up in terms of ENSO, the chance of quite an unsettled autumn. I'll let you look at the analogues updates, see more about that. But the general thrust of that update is that we're probably in for quite an unsettled autumn. The Atlantic might be shifting into a more unsettled phase for the autumn as well with this temperature contrast here. So I'm not entirely sure. I have to do more research, look at some past unsettled autumns to see whether that kind of temperature contrast in the northern Atlantic is significant or not. But it does look quite striking, the difference in the temperatures there over a relatively small area, really. So more research needed on that. This is the latest in terms of Arctic sea ice extent. We're very close to the death spiral year of 2012 in terms of Arctic sea ice extent. Of course, we're in the melting phase of the season now. We'll be bottoming out somewhere in September. Early September is when we reach our lowest Arctic sea ice extent for the year. This green dashed line is 2012, that's a death spiral year. This blue line is this year, 2017, and that's where we are right now, virtually on a par with 2012. Just because we're on a par with 2012 at the moment doesn't mean that's where we'll be when we have our minimum for this year in September. I suspect what we'll do is something a bit like that, and we won't reach the depths of Arctic melt that we did in 2012. We might do. I mean, you never guarantee what's going to happen, but I would think it's unlikely that we'll meet the minimum Arctic sea ice extent that we had in 2012. That's what happened last year. You can see that at this point last year, the Arctic sea ice extent was virtually on a par with 2012. Virtually on a par with where we are this year. You'll notice from this red line that in the end we didn't get down to the death spiral. It was a big melt season that we had last year, but we didn't get down to that green dash line. In the end, we came up short of it. So I suspect that's what is going to happen again this year. Well, obviously, we'll be keeping an eye on this over the coming weeks and next couple of months. Arctic oscillation is looking like this. So this is the observed and forecast chart for the Arctic oscillation. The black line here tells us where we've been with the AO, the red lines at the end where the Arctic oscillation is being forecast to go by the GFS ensemble. So back through the spring and into the early summer, we started off with a positive Arctic oscillation. Then we went negative through April, May, and into the early part of June. Since around middle of June, we've been in a positive phase again of the Arctic oscillation. That's where we are right now with a positive AO, although it looks like we're trending downwards a little bit through the second half of July, returning, certainly going to neutral, possibly even going a little bit on the negative side with the Arctic oscillation. Remember, the AO with the NAO as well, just an index that's reflecting the state of the atmosphere. It isn't driving anything. But when the Arctic oscillation is positive, as it has been, it tells you you've got quite a bit of low pressure through the Arctic, and consequently you'll normally strengthen the Azores high in the mid-latitudes in the Atlantic. When the Arctic oscillation goes negative, then it tells you you've got high pressure up over the North Pole, up over the Arctic. And in summer, high pressure over the Arctic can be a cooler, more unsettled signal. So we've had quite a warm start to the summer with a fair amount of hot weather through the southern part of the country. It hasn't been as good further north. Now it looks like we might, for the second half of July, we might be trending more towards a negative Arctic oscillation. That might be signs that we're going to go into a cooler and more unsettled period, perhaps, for the second half of July. Whether that would last into August, you can't really say. The Arctic oscillation normally runs on 2 or 3 month blocks. So we've had, what have we had? We've had around a month of positivity of the Arctic oscillation. It would be very early, actually, to shift away from that. So I suspect this drop down in the Arctic oscillation that we see here probably going to be temporary, and we'll probably go back into a positive phase of the AO again as we go through into August. North Atlantic oscillation is identical, so again, this is the observed and forecast chart. The black line here telling us where we've been with the NAO. The red line is where the GFS ensemble is forecasting the NAO to go. Remember, it's just an index that's reflective state of the atmosphere, this time in the North Atlantic, as opposed to the Arctic. It's not driving anything, just tells you what the atmospheric setup is doing. Very similar trends over the past few months. So we went negative with the NAO through May, particularly, kept it negative into June. Since the middle of June, we've gone into a positive phase again of the NAO. We're very, very positive with the NAO at the moment. That's where we are. That tells us we've got a very strengthened Azores high at the moment, and that's one of the reasons we're having quite a warm summer down in the southern part of the country in particular. Also, of course, been very hot through the Mediterranean. Spain, for example, experienced their hottest their hottest day on record a few days ago. That's all indicative of the Azores High being a very strengthened situation. The trend with the NAO in terms of the forecast is to move it downwards. It can't really get any higher from where it is. So the trend is to reduce the NAO, not really going into negative territory, but returning closer towards neutral through the second half of July. So it looks like the NAO and the AO are going to be trending downwards, and this might be a sign that the second half of July is going to be rather cooler and more unsettled. Of course, summer's never been particularly good across Scotland, but it could be that England and Wales, where they've had quite a good summer up to now, England and Wales could be heading for a cooler and more unsettled phase over the next couple of weeks. Be interesting to see whether that does indeed happen. Temperature anomalies for the next week looking close to average, really. Southern parts of the country are coming out a little bit warmer than average. Central and northern areas coming out a little bit cooler than average, perhaps. That takes into account a couple of hot days that are coming up in the next couple of days. So perhaps a little bit surprising that that isn't warmer than that, given the hot weather that we've got coming up from particularly Tuesday and into Wednesday as well. Precipitation anomalies are looking like this, very, very close to average. Again, a little bit wetter than average in the north and west, perhaps, otherwise close to average with precipitation. So this is how the GFS is looking for Wednesday, putting up these hot southerly southeasterly winds on Wednesday. There's the upper air temperature showing another real spike in temperatures is occurring around the middle part of the week. That could well be triggering thunderstorms as this area of low pressure moves in from the south and the southwest into that humidity. We'll be updating Stormwatch this evening with all the latest on the thunder potential. By Thursday, we're bringing in a cooler, fresher air mass from off the Atlantic around this area of low pressure, shifting that heat off into the continent. Then we go through to the end of the week and the weekend, and we just keep this area of low pressure in situ over top of the country. So that looks a little bit grim. If you've got any plans for next weekend, it could be rather unsettled with that low pressure in over top of the country, bringing showers, if not longer spells of rain. That low pressure is still there on Sunday next week, albeit drifting towards the east. And by Monday, 24th of July, that low pressure is then moving off in towards the North Sea, allowing some pressure to build from the Atlantic. But now the winds have gone into the north around the ridge here in the Atlantic, so it is going to be quite cool if that comes off, albeit with a slightly drying trend. We run up towards day 10 and we have the ridge from the Azores High building in across the country, so that looks certainly drier, not overly warm because the air is still coming in from off the Atlantic, but it's certainly drier and would be reasonably pleasant down in the southern part of the country, probably a little bit on the cool side in the north. Beyond that, beyond day 10, low pressure coming back in from off the Atlantic, and we turn quite cool and unsettled once again. So if we could have a cooler and more unsettled sort of latter stage to July here shaping up. That's how the GFS is certainly seeing things at the moment. We saw it within the GFS ensembles that we're just looking at in terms of the Arctic Oscillation and the North Atlantic Oscillation. East together finally, so got this thundery bloom coming up around the middle part of the week. Once that gets out of the way, we're into a cooler and fresher westerly air mass. Low pressure very close to the country for the end of the week, being showers, if not longer spells of rain. That lasts into the weekend. Eventually, that low pressure pushes off into the North Sea, but it turns the winds into the north. By Monday the 24th of July, we're putting down quite a cool northerly wind, albeit with a drying trend. We run up towards day 10, and again the Azores High is trying to throw a ridge in across the country, but it remains actually centred to our west. We're bringing more of a northwesterly wind down across the country, which is relatively cool and probably a little bit on the showery side as well. So it looks like we're going to be heading into a cooler and more unsettled period. Let's get this heat wave out of the way. It's only a little mini heat wave that we've got coming up Tuesday, Wednesday with a risk of thunder. Looks like after that we're going to quite a unsettled spell at the end of the week and into next weekend. And then, although it does probably dry up as we run into the final week of July, we might be looking at northerly winds and quite a cool sort of interlude, which would lower the temperature a little bit, of course. Winds in from the north. That is going to lower the temperature. So in the end, it might turn out that July is not an overly hot month. And it might be an unusual month as well, in that the first half of July could turn out to be significantly warmer than the second half of July, which is very unusual because July is a warming month, so usually the second half of July will be hotter than the first half. We might be doing things the other way round this month. We'll see how it goes. It could be that these models are going a bit over the top with this cool and unsettled signal that they're coming up with for the latter stages of July. And it is at odds with what the longer range output is doing. The CFS, the JMA that we looked at on Friday, that was all going. There are lots of dry and, particularly in terms of CFS, very hot weather through the last stages of July. So it's all a little bit complicated. These models might be going a bit over the top with this cooler and unsettled signal. The only reason I'm taking it quite seriously is that we do see within the AO and the NAO charts that they are both trending not particularly to negative territory, but down certainly closer to neutral, which would imply a cooler and more unsettled phase is likely for the latter stages of July. As ever, we'll be keeping an eye and seeing how things develop. That's the GWV Sunday Roundup for this week. Don't forget to check out the analogues for the autumn. And, of course, later on today, we'll have Stormwatch coming up as well. Right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.